There once was a nameless girl alone and afraid, running through the streets in search of help. She never imagined that the man who seemed to have it all, a millionaire businessman, would actually be the only one who could save her life. Destiny brought her to him, and a devastating revelation would change everything. If this beautiful story of overcoming adversity and love interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, continuing. The sun beat down on the dusty streets of Good Hope, a small town in rural Alabama, as Sophia ran barefoot, her small, calloused feet slapping against the hot ground. She was only 7, but the fear in her eyes showed she already knew the crueler side of the world. Her dress, once white, was now stained with dirt and sweat. Her curly hair, tangled by the wind, stuck to her tear-streaked face. Clutched in her thin arms was her only companion, a tattered rag doll her mother had made before she left. "They're going to get me, they're going to get me," she repeated softly to herself, glancing back every few steps. The men who had taken her from her Aunt Judy's house were nearby. She knew it. She could feel it. But where could she go? Who could she cry out to? In the small town of Good Hope, everyone knew the story of the fatherless girl, as they called her. The daughter of Joanna, a young woman who had worked in New York and returned pregnant, never revealing who the child's father was. After Joanna's disappearance 2 months ago, Sophia had been left in the reluctant care of her aunt, who could barely feed her own children. Sophia rounded a corner and hid behind a peeling wall. She was breathing heavily, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. She hugged the doll tighter. "You'll be okay, Lulu," she whispered to the doll. "We'll be okay." A few blocks away, in the town's only motel, a man very different from anyone who had ever set foot in that place was being held against his will. Richard Miller, one of the country's most influential businessmen, owner of the largest real estate development firm in the United States, couldn't understand how he'd ended up in this backwater town. His last memory was of leaving his Park Avenue office in New York City, getting into his armored Mercedes, when 2 men approached him, pretending to be replacement security guards. Richard surveyed the simple room where he was being held captive. The walls were yellowed with damp, the bed had a thin mattress, and the ceiling fan spun lazily without easing the heat. It was so different from his triplex penthouse on the Upper East Side or his condo in Miami. He ran a hand through his graying hair, still impeccably styled despite the circumstances. Even in this situation, he maintained the upright posture and controlled expression that had made him famous in business circles and on the covers of business magazines. "What do you want?" he asked for the 10th time, looking at the man guarding him. "If it's money, I can transfer it right now. I have contacts, I have influence. You don't know who you're dealing with." Thad, a burly, middle-aged man with scars on his face, just smiled, revealing a few missing teeth. "It's not that simple, Mr. Miller. You have something we want, but it's not money." "What then? Spit it out." "In due time, you'll know." Richard sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of it. In his 58 years, he had built an empire from scratch. The son of a bricklayer and a maid from the outskirts of New York, he had studied on a scholarship, graduated with a degree in civil engineering, and with cunning and determination, had turned a small renovation business into a real estate giant. He married Eliza, a banker's daughter, which opened even more doors. He had everything: mansions, private jets, a yacht, imported cars, offshore accounts, everything except a child. This was the wound that had never healed in his heart, the inability to give his wife an heir, to perpetuate his name and his legacy. When he had discovered his infertility years ago, it felt as if the world had collapsed on his shoulders. Eliza, who had dreamed of being a mother since she was a girl, had sunk into a deep depression. The treatments, the attempts, the specialists around the world, nothing had worked. It was his best-kept secret, his greatest shame. To the world, they were just a power couple who had chosen not to have children to focus on their careers. Thad's cell phone rang, interrupting Richard's thoughts. "Hello? You lost the girl?" "What do you mean you lost the girl, you incompetent fool?" Thad yelled into the phone. "Find her now or you're in deep trouble." Richard frowned. What girl could that be? What did a child have to do with his kidnapping? Sophia kept running through the town, dodging pedestrians and occasional cars. Turning a corner, she spotted a man in uniform, a police officer. Without a second thought, she ran towards him. "Sir, police officer, help me!" she shouted with all the force her small lungs could muster. Sergeant Carter, who was just passing through town, stopped and looked at the ragged little girl approaching him. Just another street kid, he initially thought. It was common to see abandoned children wandering through small towns, especially in poor regions like this one, but something in Sophia's eyes made him hesitate. "What is it, little girl?" he asked, adjusting the belt with his holster. "My father is here," Sophia cried, pulling on the sleeve of his uniform. "Your father? Where?" "There, in that motel. The bad men took him." Sophia pointed frantically towards the small motel at the end of the street. Carter looked in the direction she indicated, skeptical. It was probably just another story made up by a needy child seeking attention. But something about the genuine desperation in the girl's eyes moved him. "What's your name?" "Sophia." "And your father's name?" Sophia hesitated. She had never known her father. Her mother always changed the subject when she asked, but instinctively she felt this was her only chance. I don't know his name, but he's in there, please." Carter sighed, thinking. He was probably wasting his time, but he decided to check it out. If there was any chance a child was in danger, it was his duty to investigate. "All right, let's go have a look. But you stay behind me, understand?" Sophia nodded, clutching the leg of the sergeant's uniform as they walked towards the motel. On the way, Carter made a quick call for backup, just as a precaution. Meanwhile, in New York, Eliza Miller paced nervously around the living room of their 5,000-square-foot mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. Richard was never late for dinner, and it was already past 10 p.m. with no word from him. She had tried calling his cell phone dozens of times, but it went straight to voicemail. She had already contacted his assistants, his driver, even some of his partners, but no one knew of her husband's whereabouts. "Ma'am, the company's COO is on the line," the housekeeper said, handing her the phone. Eliza took it, a knot forming in her stomach. "Regina, any news?" "Nothing yet, Mrs. Miller. We've contacted all the hospitals, police precincts. Nothing. The car's tracker indicates it's in the company parking garage, but the car isn't there. Someone must have removed the device. This isn't normal. Richard would never just disappear like this. Something has happened, I'm sure of it. We've already hired a private investigator and are about to file a missing persons report. Would you like me to come over?" "No, that's not necessary. Keep me informed. I'll keep trying his contacts." Eliza hung up and sat on the Italian leather sofa, feeling the weight of her 55 years. Despite numerous plastic surgeries and cosmetic treatments, at that moment, the worry lines etched her face. She glanced at the photo on the side table. She and Richard, on their yacht in the Hamptons, smiling, tanned, the perfect image of a successful couple. A sham, she thought bitterly. Her marriage to Richard, which would celebrate its 30th anniversary next month, had long since turned into a partnership of convenience. They both kept up appearances flawlessly, attended the same events, smiled for the same cameras, but had been sleeping in separate rooms for over a decade. The dream of starting a family was the first thing to die after they discovered Richard's infertility. Eliza had never fully forgiven him for it, although rationally she knew it wasn't his fault. She had tried to convince him to adopt a child, but Richard had always vehemently refused. "A Miller has to have Miller blood," he would say, revealing a pride that contrasted with his humble origins. Eliza suspected that deep down he was afraid an adopted child would one day discover his origins and reject him, just as he himself had rejected his poor past. At the motel in Good Hope, Sergeant Carter approached the front desk, with Sophia partially hidden behind him. The receptionist, an elderly man with thick-lensed glasses, looked up from the newspaper he was reading. "Can I help you, Sergeant?" "Good afternoon. I'm doing a routine check. Do you have any guests who arrived recently, maybe today or yesterday?" The receptionist scratched his bald head. "Let me see." "Yes, we do. 3 men from New York. An older one seemed to be the boss, and 2 younger ones. They took room 7 at the end of the hall." Carter felt Sophia squeeze his leg tighter. "Are they all there now?" "No. 2 of them left earlier. Only the older one and one of the young guys are there." Carter thanked him and signaled for Sophia to stay at the reception while he checked, but the girl refused to let go of his leg. "I'm going with you, that's my dad in there." The sergeant hesitated, but decided it was better to keep her close than to leave her alone. He walked slowly down the hallway, hand on the gun in his holster, feeling the adrenaline rise. When he reached the door of room 7, he knocked firmly. "Police! Open the door!" Inside the room, Thad jumped up and signaled for Richard to be quiet, pointing a gun at him. Richard, seeing a chance to escape, prepared to shout for help, but Thad was faster and covered his mouth with a cloth. "Make a sound and you won't get out of here alive," he whispered, dragging Richard into the bathroom. Carter knocked again, harder. "Last chance. Open up or I'm breaking it down." After a few seconds of silence, Carter decided to act. With a swift movement and a strong kick, he broke down the door. Sophia, who was right behind him, ran inside before he could stop her. "Dad! Dad!" she cried, looking around the empty room. Carter quickly checked the bathroom, finding it empty as well. The window was open, and looking out, he saw 2 figures running through the back of the motel property. "Damn it! Stay here, girl!" he ordered, running to the window. But before he could jump out, he noticed something on the floor, a fine leather wallet. He bent down to pick it up, and upon opening it saw a driver's license with the photo of a middle-aged, well-dressed man with a serious expression. Richard Miller, the document said, with an address in New York City. Carter looked at Sophia, who was now crying, clutching her doll. "Is this your father?" he asked, showing her the license. Sophia stared at the photo for a long moment, her wide eyes reflecting confusion and hope. I don't know," she finally admitted. "But he was here. I know he was." Carter pocketed the wallet and grabbed his radio to call for more backup. The situation was much more complex than he had initially imagined. Richard Miller, he recognized the name from business news reports, was one of the richest and most influential men in the country. What was he doing in this roadside motel in a tiny town in rural Alabama? Meanwhile, Thad was dragging Richard along a dirt road behind the motel, towards an old car parked among the trees. The businessman tried to break free, but he was weak after a full day without proper food. "Who was that girl?" Richard asked, breathless. "Why did she say I was her father?" Thad pushed Richard into the car and started the engine with trembling hands. "Shut up and get in. The boss is going to kill me for this mess." Richard, now in the back seat, looked out the window as the car sped away, leaving a cloud of dust behind. Who was that? Child? Why had she called him Dad? And more importantly, what did these men want with him? In a simple house on the outskirts of Good Hope, Mrs. June, a 70-year-old African-American woman with weathered skin and completely white hair, was finishing watering her plants when she heard the sound of sirens. She adjusted the glasses on her wrinkled face and walked to the gate to see what was happening. Several police cars sped by, heading towards the edge of town. June sighed, worried. The small town rarely saw so much police activity. She went back inside, feeling the weight of her age in her joints. In the modest living room, she opened an old drawer and took out a yellowed photograph, a younger version of herself, standing next to an elegant couple in front of an imposing mansion. The blonde woman smiled shyly, while the man maintained a serious expression. "Richard Miller," she murmured to herself, running her fingers over the man's image. After all this time, June had been the housekeeper at the Millers' home for nearly 20 years before retiring and returning to her hometown of Good Hope. She knew secrets about that family that no one else did, including the biggest one of all, a secret that would change her former employer's life forever, if he ever found out. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her niece, Judy, sounding desperate. "Aunt June, Sophia's gone. I've looked everywhere for her, and now there are police all over the place. I'm so scared." June felt her heart clench. "Sophia, Joanna's daughter." "Yes, that's her. The girl who's been with me since Joanna disappeared." "Calm down, honey. I'll help you look. That child can't be out there on her own." As she hung up the phone, June looked at the photograph in her hands again. A chill ran down her spine. Could it be? After all these years? At the Good Hope police station, Sergeant Carter was trying to calm Sophia, who was now drinking hot chocolate, sitting in a chair far too big for her. "You're sure you don't know this man?" he asked gently, showing Richard's license again. Sophia shook her head, clutching her rag doll. "But I know he's my dad. My mom told me before she left. She said, 'One day your father will come back for you. He's rich and important.'" Carter tried to make sense of it all. A poor girl from rural Alabama claiming to be the daughter of one of the country's biggest businessmen. It sounded crazy. But something about the story intrigued him. Why would Richard Miller be held captive in the exact same town where this girl lived? Was it just a coincidence? "And your mother? Where is she now?" he asked. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "She went away. She said she was going to work in the big city to make money. But she never came back." Carter made some notes. He would need to check recent missing person reports. Just then the phone rang. It was the NYPD returning his call. "Sergeant Carter, this is Detective Martinez from New York. We received your message about Richard Miller. Have you really located him?" "Well, I found him and lost him. He was being held captive here in Good Hope, Alabama, but the kidnappers fled before we could apprehend them. We have his ID and have launched an operation to locate the suspect's vehicle." "This is very serious. His wife reported him missing just a few hours ago. We're sending a specialized team immediately. Keep us informed of any developments." After hanging up, Carter turned his attention back to Sophia, who had fallen asleep in the chair, exhausted after the tumultuous day. He looked at the fragile girl, her torn clothes, her dirty, bare feet, and felt a wave of compassion. Whether her story was true or not, she needed protection. In the getaway car, Richard tried to understand what was happening. The kidnappers seemed more nervous than he was, arguing among themselves about the next step. "The plan was simple. Grab the old man, find the girl, use them both to make the deal, and that's it. How did you guys manage to mess it up so badly?" Thad shouted into the phone, probably talking to the accomplice who had lost Sophia. "What girl?" Richard asked again. "What does she have to do with me?" Thad hung up and looked at Richard in the rearview mirror with a sarcastic smile. The great Richard Miller, the man who has everything, except the one thing he wanted most in life. Isn't that right, Mr. Miller? A son, an heir for that whole empire. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. How did this man? "I know about his infertility. It was his most closely guarded secret." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And soon you'll understand everything. The boss has big plans for you and that girl. Plans that will change your lives forever." The car continued down the dirt road, kicking up dust as it moved away from the small town. On the horizon, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange. Amidst the chaos, a truth hidden for years was slowly beginning to emerge, connecting the unlikely destinies of a powerful businessman and a poor girl from the rural South. "But who is this girl?" Richard insisted, a strange feeling taking over his chest, something between fear and an inexplicable anxiety. Thad just laughed, accelerating the car. "Sophia. Her name is Sophia, and believe me, Mr. Miller, she's much more important to you than you can imagine." Night fell over Good Hope, Alabama, bringing with it the characteristic silence of small southern towns. At the police station, Sophia slept curled up in a borrowed blanket, her rag doll held tightly against her chest. Sergeant Carter watched the girl as he drank his third coffee of the night. Something about this child deeply intrigued him. Why was she so convinced that Richard Miller was her father? And more importantly, why would the businessman be held captive in this remote little town? The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Sergeant Carter. This is Detective Martinez from New York. We just spoke with Eliza Miller, the businessman's wife. She's taking their private jet to Alabama right now. Should arrive around 10 a.m. "Understood. And what about the search for the kidnapper's vehicle?" "No news yet. They seem to know the area well. We'll send helicopters at first light to assist in the search." Carter hung up and sighed, looking at Sophia again. What would he do with the girl when the millionaire's wife arrived? If there was any truth to her story, the meeting would be turbulent, to say the least. Just then, the station door opened, and an elderly black woman with white hair hurried in. "Good evening, officer. I'm June Nascimento. I heard you found a little girl, Sophia. I came to see if it's the same one who's missing from my niece Judy's house." Carter nodded, gesturing towards the sleeping girl. "This is her. We found her running from some men. She claims that Richard Miller, a businessman from New York, is her father. Do you know anything about that?" June approached Sophia slowly, her cataract-clouded eyes carefully studying the girl's small face. Then she sat down with difficulty in a nearby chair. "Sophia is my great-grandniece, Joanna's daughter. Joanna disappeared 2 months ago. Nobody knows where she went. The girl stayed with her aunt, Judy, but, well, Judy has 5 of her own kids to raise. She barely has enough to eat." "And what about the girl's father?" "She insists that Richard Miller is her father." June was silent for a moment, as if weighing how much she should reveal. Joanna worked in New York for a few years, as a maid. When she came back here, she was already pregnant. She never wanted to say who the father was, only that he was a rich and powerful man. Carter leaned forward, interested. "Do you know Richard Miller?" The old woman's eyes blinked nervously. "Yes, sir, I do. I was the housekeeper in his home for almost 20 years, until I retired and came back here to my hometown." The sergeant almost dropped his coffee mug. "You worked in Richard Miller's house, and you knew Joanna, Sophia's mother." "Joanna is my niece's daughter. She grew up calling me great-aunt. When she turned 18, I arranged for her to work at the Miller's house as a kitchen helper. She was there for 2 years. When she left, she came back here already expecting Sophia." The pieces were starting to fit together in the sergeant's mind. The coincidence was too great to be ignored. "And you believe Richard Miller could be Sophia's father?" June looked away. "I don't know, officer. Joanna never wanted to say, but there was a secret. Something only I knew about Mr. Miller, something he hid even from his own wife." Meanwhile, miles away in an abandoned farmhouse near a neighboring town, Richard Miller sat in a wooden chair, his hands tied behind his back, facing a man who had just arrived. Unlike the other thugs, this one was well-dressed, spoke with a New York accent, and had an air of authority. "We finally meet in person, Mr. Miller," the man said, sitting down across from Richard. "You can call me Caesar." "What do you want from me, if it's money?" Caesar laughed, cutting him off. "Money? Do you really think I'd go to all this trouble for money? No, Mr. Miller, what I want is much more valuable." "Then what?" "Revenge. Justice. Call it what you will." Richard frowned, confused. "I've never seen you before in my life. What could I have possibly done to you to make you want revenge?" Caesar stood up and walked slowly around the chair where Richard was tied. "You really don't remember me? Of course, why would you? I was just one of the many employees you fired when you bought Sunrise Construction 10 years ago. 500 family men out on the street overnight, so you could increase your profits by 2%. Richard sighed. Throughout his career, he had made many hostile takeovers, fired thousands of people. It was the price of success in the business world. "I'm sorry, but that's business. It's not personal." "Not personal?" Caesar raised his voice, his face contorting with rage. "My wife was pregnant when I lost my job. We lost our house, our car. My wife fell into a depression and—" He paused, taking a deep breath. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is that I found out. Something about you, Mr. Miller. Something worth more than your entire empire." "What are you talking about?" "Your infertility. Your biggest secret and shame." Richard turned pale. How could this man know? "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, yes, you do. The great Richard Miller, who can't give his beautiful wife an heir. What a humiliation for a man like you, isn't it? A self-made man who can't pass on his legacy, his name, his blood." Richard felt his stomach sink. For years he had struggled to hide this truth. Only his private doctor and Eliza knew. It was his deepest wound, the one that had never fully healed. How do I know?" "I have my sources. But that's not the most interesting part. The most interesting part is that you, in your desperation, did something very reckless a few years ago." Caesar leaned in, whispering close to Richard's ear. "An experimental procedure. Remember, at the Fertility Institute, with Dr. Morris, that discreet doctor who only treated the very rich, who wanted to keep secrets. You donated your genetic material for a procedure that could potentially reverse your infertility. Richard felt his blood run cold. It was true. 8 years ago, desperate after countless failed treatment attempts, he had undergone an experimental procedure at an exclusive clinic. Dr. Morris had guaranteed total secrecy, and the procedure had involved collecting and preserving his genetic material for future attempts. I don't understand. What does this have to do with my kidnapping, with that girl who called me her father? Cesar smiled, a cold, calculating smile. Everything, Mr. Miller. It has everything to do with it. In New York, Eliza Miller was finishing getting ready to board the company's private jet. Even in a time of crisis, she maintained her impeccable appearance, perfectly dyed and styled blonde hair, discreet but effective makeup hiding the signs of age, designer clothes that flattered her still slender figure. The image of perfection, a mask she had worn for so many years that she sometimes forgot who she was underneath it. Regina, the company's COO, and Richard's right-hand woman, was waiting for her in the living room. The jet is ready, Mrs. Miller. We'll arrive in Alabama before dawn, and from there a helicopter will take us to Good Hope. Eliza nodded, picking up her Italian leather handbag. I still can't believe Richard was kidnapped. He was always so careful about security. The police said he's okay, they just couldn't recapture him in time, but they're mobilizing search teams throughout the region. What I don't understand is what Richard would be doing in rural Alabama. He never mentioned any business in that region. Regina looked away, visibly uncomfortable. About that, there's something I need to show you. Regina opened her briefcase and took out a few printed sheets. The IT department analyzed Richard's computer search history from the past few weeks. He was frequently searching for information about Good Hope, Alabama, and also about a woman named Joanna Nascimento. Eliza took the papers, confused. Who is Joanna Nascimento? We're not sure. From what we've found, she worked as a kitchen helper in your mansion a few years ago. Then she went back to her hometown, Good Hope. Eliza frowned, trying to remember. So many maids have passed through that house. I don't recall a Joanna. There's one more thing. Richard also searched for information on birth certificates and paternity acknowledgement. Eliza felt her legs weaken and sat down on the sofa. Her heart was beating rapidly. Regina, what are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Mrs. Miller. I'm just reporting what we found. I thought you should know before we get there. Eliza was silent, digesting the information. Could it be possible that Richard had a child, the result of a relationship with a maid? After all those years suffering from his infertility, with the painful treatments and dashed hopes? The idea was absurd. Richard was too proud to cheat, especially with a maid. And besides, he was infertile. The doctors had confirmed it dozens of times. There must be some mistake, she said finally, standing up. We'll find out what's happening when we get there. On the way to the airport, however, Eliza couldn't stop thinking. What if it was true? What if Richard really had a child hidden away all these years? What would that mean for her marriage, for the company, for the entire empire they had built together? Back at the Good Hope police station, Sophia had woken up and was now eating a sandwich that June had brought for her. The old woman watched the girl with tenderness and concern. Aunt June, Sophia said between bites, is that man who was at the motel really my dad? June shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Why do you think he's your dad, sweetie? Because Mommy told me before she left. She said, Sophia, your dad is an important man who lives in a big city. One day he'll come to get you. And then those bad men came and took him. June exchanged a look with Sergeant Carter, who was listening intently to the conversation. Sophia, dear, June began cautiously, do you know if your mother knew those men who took the man from the motel? Sophia shook her head. I don't know, but they came to Aunt Judy's house, looking for me. They said they were going to take me to meet my dad, but I got scared and ran away. Carter approached, crouching down to be at Sophia's level. Sophia, did those men hurt you? Or your Aunt Judy? No. They just said my dad wanted to see me. But Aunt Judy started screaming and I ran. June sighed, visibly disturbed. My goodness, where is Joanna when we need her? She should be here, explaining all of this. Carter stood up and gestured for June to follow him to a more secluded corner. Mrs. June, you mentioned you knew a secret about Richard Miller. What exactly do you know? June hesitated, looking at Sophia, who was now playing with her doll. Richard Miller is infertile, Sergeant. He was diagnosed many years ago. It's a secret he guards with his life. Only his wife and his doctor knew. And me, because I overheard a conversation I shouldn't have. So he couldn't be Sophia's father. Not naturally, but 8 years ago he tried an experimental procedure at a clinic in New York. I heard him arguing with his wife about it. She didn't want him to, said it was risky, that it could expose their secret, but he was desperate to have a child. And did the procedure work? As far as I know, no. They never had children, but... But what, Mrs. June? The old woman bit her lip, as if considering whether she should continue. Joanna was working at their house around that time. She was young, pretty, and she was always around, especially when Mrs. Eliza traveled, which happened frequently. Carter began to understand the implications. Are you suggesting that... I'm not suggesting anything, June interrupted. I'm just telling you what I know. Joanna left the Millers. How suddenly, without explanation? A few months later, she showed up here, pregnant. She never wanted to say who the father was, but Sophia was born exactly 9 months after Joanna left New York. The sergeant looked at Sophia, noticing for the first time the resemblance. The same piercing brown eyes he had seen in the photo on Richard Miller's license. The same shape of the face. Was it possible? If this is true, we're dealing with a case much more complicated than a simple kidnapping. June nodded gravely. That's why we need to find Richard Miller, and also find out what happened to Joanna. She would never abandon Sophia of her own free will. At the abandoned farmhouse, Richard was trying to process everything Caesar had revealed to him. Are you saying I have a daughter, that the genetic material from that procedure was used without my knowledge? Caesar shrugged. What can I say? Greed speaks louder. Dr. Morris saw an opportunity to make some extra money, a young maid willing to do anything for a better life, a millionaire desperate to have a child. It was just a matter of connecting the dots. This is absurd. I don't believe a word you're saying. You don't have to believe me. Believe the DNA tests I had done. The girl, Sophia, is your biological daughter, Mr. Miller. 99.9% certainty. Richard felt the world spin around him. A daughter? After all those years believing he was incapable of creating a life, discovering he had a daughter was like an emotional earthquake. His mind was filled with questions. How exactly had this happened? Did the girl's mother know the genetic material was his? Did she get pregnant on purpose? And why had she never come to him asking for money for acknowledgement? Where is the girl's mother? I want to talk to her. Cesar laughed bitterly. Joanna Nascimento disappeared 2 months ago. No one knows where she went. The most accepted theory is that she ran off with some boyfriend, abandoning her daughter with her aunt. And the girl, where is she now? That's what I'd like to know. My men were supposed to bring her here for our little family reunion. But it seems she managed to escape. A smart kid, I must admit. Maybe she inherited your business acumen. Richard felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, anger, but also pride. The idea of having a daughter, a part of him continuing in the world, had always been his greatest dream. But not like this, not under these circumstances. What do you want from me, anyway? If it's to extort money using this absurd story. Money? Caesar interrupted, laughing. No, Mr. Miller. What I want is much simpler. I want you to feel the pain of losing everything you love, just like I did when you destroyed my life. Richard then realized the depth of the man's hatred. It wasn't just about money or superficial revenge. It was something deeper, darker. And how do you plan to do that? First, I'm going to reveal your secret to the world. The great Richard Miller, infertile, incapable of being a complete man. Then, I'll introduce Sophia as your legitimate daughter, the result of an affair with a maid. Imagine the scandal, the humiliation for your wife. Your reputation, which you've built so carefully, will be shattered. Richard remained silent, processing the threat. His infertility exposed to the world would be devastating to his ego, to his public image. And Eliza, how would she react to learning he had a daughter with another woman after all those years of treatments and dashed hopes? And what happens to the girl, to Sophia? She's not to blame for any of this. Cesar seemed surprised by the question. Since when do you care about the innocent people affected by your actions, Mr. Miller? How many children went without food when their parents lost their jobs because of your business decisions? Richard looked down. It was true. Throughout his career, he had made tough choices, without thinking about the people affected. To him, they were just numbers on a spreadsheet, never faces, never real stories. Anyway, Cesar continued, don't worry about Sophia. When I'm done with you, she'll be very well taken care of. After all, as your only biological heir, she'll be entitled to a considerable portion of your fortune. I'll make sure she gets what's rightfully hers. You can't do this. The girl doesn't even know me. Details, just details. The important thing is that your DNA is in her, and that's all the courts and the press need to know. Caesar stood up, looking at his watch. It's getting late. Get some rest, Mr. Miller. Tomorrow will be a big day. If my men can find Sophia, we'll finally have our family reunion. After Caesar left, Richard was alone in the dark room of the abandoned farmhouse, his hands still tied, his thoughts in a whirlwind. A daughter. He had a daughter. The idea hit him in waves, alternating between disbelief and a strange sense of fulfillment. For years he had dreamed of having an heir, someone to continue his legacy. And now, in the most unlikely of circumstances, he discovered that his dream had come true without him even knowing. But the girl was in danger. Caesar clearly intended to use her as a pawn in his game of revenge. Richard needed to escape, to find her first, to protect her. For the first time in his life, he felt a protective instinct so strong it scared him. Was this how fathers felt? This visceral need to protect, even without knowing the child? As he struggled against the ropes that bound him, Richard did something he hadn't done in many years. He prayed. He prayed that Sophia would be safe, that he could escape in time to protect her, that he could somehow fix the mess his life had become. At the police station, Sophia had finally fallen asleep again, this time with her head resting on June's lap, who gently stroked her hair. The old woman looked at the girl with tenderness and concern. "You know, Sergeant," she said in a low voice, "I always suspected. Sophia has his eyes, the same way of frowning when she's thinking, but I never imagined it was really possible." Carter, who was typing a report on his old-fashioned computer, looked up. "The arrival of Miller's wife is going to complicate everything. How do you think she'll react?" June sighed. "Mrs. Eliza is a proud woman who values appearances very much. Her dream was always to have children, to start a family. When she found out her husband was infertile, something died inside her. She never accepted the idea of adoption. She wanted a biological child or nothing. To find out now that there's a girl, her husband's daughter, with another woman, it's going to be a shock. More than a shock, Sergeant. It's going to be devastating." Carter looked at his watch. Almost midnight. In a few hours, Eliza Miller would arrive, and with her a tornado of emotions and complications. And somewhere out there, Richard Miller was still being held captive, possibly in mortal danger. The truth about Sophia's paternity would have to wait. The priority now was to find the businessman and ensure his safety. "I'm going to step up the search," he said, picking up his radio. "If we're lucky, we'll find Miller before dawn." June nodded, continuing to stroke Sophia's hair. "I hope you find him. There are so many things that need to be said, so many wrongs that need to be righted." As the night wore on over Good Hope, the destinies of Richard, Sophia, and everyone involved in this complex plot were about to intertwine in ways none of them could have predicted. The dawn would bring not just a new day, but the beginning of a journey that would change their lives forever. The sun was beginning to rise over Good Hope, Alabama, when the sound of helicopter blades cut through the morning silence. The townspeople, unaccustomed to such commotion, came to the doors of their simple houses to watch the sleek black helicopter descend into an open field near the police station. Clouds of red dust rose as the blades gradually slowed. At the station, Sergeant Carter adjusted his uniform and ran a hand through his greying hair, preparing to receive the distinguished visitor. June, who had spent the night with Sophia, was helping the girl wash up in a small sink at the back of the station. "Aunt June, who's arriving?" Sophia asked, as the elderly woman tried to untangle her rebellious curls with her fingers. "It's the wife of the man from the motel, honey. She came from New York to help find him." "Is she my mother too?" Sophia asked innocently. June hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "No, dear, your mother is Joanna. Remember, the man from the motel's wife is named Eliza." Sophia nodded, though her eyes showed she was still confused by the whole situation. How could one explain to a 7-year-old the complexity of the plot that was unfolding? June sighed, helping Sophia into a clean outfit she had brought from home, a simple but clean and ironed little dress. At the entrance to the station, a tall, elegant woman stepped out of a police car that had brought her from the makeshift landing field. Eliza Miller wore a white linen pantsuit, high-heeled shoes that seemed absurdly out of place on the dirt streets, and dark sunglasses that hid eyes likely red from crying or lack of sleep. Beside her, Regina, the company's COO, carried a briefcase and spoke incessantly on her cell phone. Carter stepped forward to greet them. "Mrs. Miller, I'm Sergeant Carter. Welcome to Good Hope." Eliza removed her sunglasses, revealing piercing blue eyes and an expression of steely determination. "Where is my husband, Sergeant? What do you know so far?" "Please, come in. We can talk more privately." Carter led Eliza and Regina to his small office at the back of the station. As they passed through the common area, Eliza noticed an elderly black woman sitting with a small girl. For a moment their eyes met, the wealthy, powerful woman from the city and the poor child from the country. Something in the girl's piercing brown eyes made Eliza shudder, as if she recognized something familiar. Once in Carter's office, Eliza sat rigidly on the edge of the offered chair. "I'll get straight to the point, Sergeant. I know my husband was seen here, held captive in a local motel, and that they escaped with him before you could intercept them. What else have you discovered?" Carter cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Mrs. Miller, we are pursuing several lines of investigation. Search teams are combing the entire region with air support. We have some leads on the vehicle used in the escape, an old green Ford Escort. And what about a motive? Have you received any ransom demand?" "Not yet, but there are complications." Eliza frowned. "What kind of complications?" Carter hesitated, glancing at Regina, who maintained a neutral expression. "Mrs. Miller, the person who alerted us to your husband was a child, a 7-year-old girl named Sophia. And what's the relevance of that?" "The girl claims that your husband is her father." Eliza's face visibly paled, but she maintained her composure, only tightening her grip on the handle of her designer bag. "That's absurd. My husband has no children. He is—" She stopped abruptly, as if realizing she was about to reveal something intimate. "I understand this seems unlikely," Carter continued, "but there are some interesting coincidences." "Such as?" "The girl's mother, Joanna Nascimento, worked in your home a few years ago. She suddenly left her job and returned to Good Hope pregnant. The child was born 9 months later." Eliza stood up abruptly. "Are you insinuating that my husband had an affair with a maid? That's ridiculous. Richard would never— He couldn't—" She shook her head, trying to organize her thoughts. "Besides, Richard can't have children. He's infertile." The ensuing silence was thick and heavy. Regina stared at the floor, visibly uncomfortable. Carter maintained a neutral, professional expression. "Mrs. Miller," he said finally, "there's a woman here who worked in your house for many years, June Nascimento. She has some information that might be relevant to the case." Eliza sat down again, more out of necessity than choice, as if her legs could no longer support her. "June? The old housekeeper?" "Yes, ma'am. She is the great-aunt of Joanna, the girl's mother." Eliza closed her eyes for a moment. It was too much to process at once. Her husband kidnapped, a child claiming to be his daughter, the old housekeeper somehow involved. "I want to speak with her, and with the girl." On the other side of town, on a dirt road that cut through fields of cotton, a police car advanced slowly. the officers inside scanning every inch of the arid landscape. It was then that they noticed in the distance an abandoned building. An old cotton gin, shut down for years. "Look over there," one of the officers pointed. "Looks like there's movement." They approached cautiously, noticing a green Ford Escort parked behind the property. Upon checking the license plate, they confirmed it was the vehicle they were looking for. "We found them," the officer said into the radio, "requesting backup at the old Sunrise Farm 10 miles east of town." Inside the abandoned farmhouse, Caesar received the news that the police had located their hideout. "Damn it, how did they find us so quickly?" he shouted, punching the peeling wall. Thad, nervous, was gathering documents and equipment. "They must have tracked the car. What do we do with him?" he asked, gesturing to Richard, who was still tied to a chair. Caesar thought quickly. "Take him to the other location. Use the back trail, the one that goes by the creek. The police cars can't get through there. And you? I'll distract the police, buy you some time to escape. We'll meet at point B in 2 hours." Richard, who had heard the entire conversation, felt a mix of hope and fear. The police were close, but the kidnappers planned to move him to another, possibly even more isolated location. And most importantly, he still didn't know the whereabouts of Sophia, the girl who, according to Caesar, was his daughter. "Where are they taking the girl?" Richard asked, as Thad untied him from the chair, only to tie his hands behind his back. "Shut up and walk," Thad replied, pushing him towards a back door. At the station, Eliza faced June with a mixture of recognition and suspicion. The former housekeeper stood tall despite her age, her eyes meeting her former employer's directly. "June," Eliza began, her voice controlled, "the sergeant told me you have information about my husband's disappearance." "I have some theories, Mrs. Eliza, and I also know some things that might help understand why all this is happening." Sophia, sitting next to June, watched the two women with curiosity. Eliza avoided looking directly at the girl, as if afraid of what she might see in that little face. "Mrs. Eliza," June continued, "do you know that your husband underwent an experimental procedure 8 years ago at the Fertility Institute with Dr. Morris?" Eliza felt her blood run cold. How did June know that? It was a secret she and Richard guarded, with their lives. "That's a private matter, June. I don't see how it relates to the kidnapping." "It has everything to do with it, ma'am, because 9 months after that procedure, Joanna, who worked in your kitchen, came back to Good Hope pregnant. And the result is right here," she said, gesturing to Sophia. Eliza finally looked directly at the girl. Sophia had intense brown eyes, almost identical to Richard's, the same facial shape, the same determined chin. The resemblance was undeniable, and it hit her like a punch to the gut. "Are you saying this girl is my husband's daughter? How is that possible? Richard is infertile. The doctors confirmed it multiple times. The procedure he underwent included the collection and storage of genetic material, didn't it, for future fertilization attempts?" "Yes, but we never used it. I gave up after so many failed attempts." "Someone at the clinic must have used that material without authorization, Mrs. Eliza. And Joanna somehow was the recipient." "That's insane. Why would a maid be chosen for that?" June sighed. "That's the mystery. Joanna never told me all the details. She just said she had made a deal with someone powerful who would guarantee her and the child's future, but that someone never showed up to keep their promise." Eliza stood up and walked to the window, trying to process the bombshell information. Richard, her husband, the father of a child with a maid, without even knowing. It was too surreal to accept. "Even if that's true," she said finally, "what does it have to do with the kidnapping?" At that moment, Carter's radio crackled with an urgent message. "We've located the hideout. Old Sunrise Farm, east of town. Backup is on the way." Carter quickly grabbed the radio. "Understood. Is the victim located?" "Negative. We suspect they're on the run. A vehicle was seen leaving the property via a back trail." "Maintain the search. I'm on my way," Carter replied, standing up. "Have you found my husband?" Eliza asked anxiously. "We've located where he was being held, but it seems the kidnappers moved him. I'm heading there now." "I'm going with you," Eliza declared, grabbing her bag. "Ma'am, it's dangerous. It's my husband out there. I'm going." Seeing Eliza's determination, Carter nodded. And what about me and Sophia? June asked. Stay here where it's safe. I'll leave 2 officers on guard. As Eliza and Carter hurried out of the station, Sophia tugged on June's sleeve. Auntie, that lady doesn't like me, does she? June hugged the girl. It's not that, sweetie. She's just worried about her husband, and there's a lot she doesn't understand yet. Will I get to see my dad when they find him? June felt a lump in her throat. How could she explain the complexity of this situation to a child? Let's wait for them to come back, Sophia. Everything will work out, you'll see. But deep down, June feared the outcome of these events. She knew Eliza and Richard Miller well. She knew of their wounded pride, their accumulated resentments, their guarded secrets. How would they react when confronted with such an unexpected and potentially devastating truth? At Sunrise Farm, the police were searching the abandoned site, finding evidence that Richard had been there. A chair with ropes, marks in the dust, documents left behind in the hasty escape. One of the officers found something particularly interesting, a folder with the logo of the Fertility Institute. Eliza immediately recognized the folder when she arrived at the scene with Carter. This clinic, it's where Richard had the procedure, June mentioned, she said, taking the folder with trembling hands. Inside were medical documents detailing the procedure Richard had undergone 8 years earlier, including signed consent forms. But there was something else, a contract signed by Joanna Nascimento, agreeing to be a recipient of genetic material as part of a special project at the clinic. And furthermore, a recent DNA test result comparing Richard's genetic material with Sophia's. Compatibility, 99.9%. My God, Eliza murmured, letting the papers fall from her hands. Mrs. Miller, are you all right? Carter asked, concerned by the woman's sudden pallor. It's true, she whispered. The girl is Richard's daughter. At that moment, another officer ran into the room. Sergeant, we've found the trail they used to escape. It leads to a property about 15 miles from here, on the other side of the river. Mobilize all units. We're going to surround them, Carter ordered. Meanwhile, in the car taking Richard along the rough trail, Thad drove nervously, constantly checking the rearview mirror. I think we lost them, he said, more to himself than to Richard. Why are you doing this? Richard asked, trying to buy time and gather information. Caesar said he wants revenge, but this goes far beyond a layoff. What really happened? Thad looked at him in the rearview mirror. You really don't remember, do you? When you shut down Sunrise Construction, it wasn't just Caesar who lost his job. Hundreds of employees were out on the street, many with families to support. Caesar's wife was 8 months pregnant. The stress of unemployment, the humiliation, she went into premature labor. The baby didn't make it. Richard felt a weight in his chest. He had never stopped to think about the human consequences of his business decisions. To him, they were just numbers on a spreadsheet, costs to be cut to maximize profits. I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. Why would you? To you, we're all disposable. But Caesar swore that one day you would feel the same pain he felt, and when he found out about your secret daughter, he saw the perfect opportunity. And what's his plan? To kill me? Thad laughed bitterly. Killing you would be too easy. No, he wants you to suffer, to lose everything you've built, to be publicly humiliated. And then he wants to use your own daughter against you. The car bounced over a pothole, causing Richard to hit his head on the ceiling. When he recovered from the impact, he saw they were approaching another farm, smaller and more isolated than the first. We're here, Thad announced. Your new home for the next few days, until Caesar decides the next step. At the station, Sophia was playing distractedly with her rag doll, while June spoke in a low voice with Regina, the COO who had stayed behind. Ms. Regina, June was saying, there's something I didn't tell Mrs. Eliza. Something only Joanna knew, and she told me just before she disappeared. What is it? Joanna found out who was behind it all, who arranged for her to get pregnant with Mr. Richard's genetic material, and it wasn't the clinic, not directly. It was someone who paid a lot of money for it to happen. Who? June hesitated, looking at Sophia to make sure the girl wasn't listening. Cesar Rodriguez. Regina frowned. Cesar Rodriguez, the former director of Sunrise Construction, which Richard acquired a few years ago. The very same. Joanna told me he approached her shortly after she started working at the miller's house. He offered her a lot of money, said it was a simple medical procedure, that no one would ever know. Joanna was young, poor, dreaming of giving her family here a better life. She accepted without fully understanding what she was doing. But why? Why would Caesar do something like that? Revenge. After Richard shut down his construction company, Caesar lost everything, including a child his wife was expecting, who was born prematurely due to the stress and didn't survive. Regina brought a hand to her mouth, horrified. My God! And now he's using Sophia as an instrument of revenge against Richard. Exactly. Joanna found out the truth when Sophia was about 5. Caesar showed up again, wanting the girl. He said it was time to put his plan into action. Joanna refused to hand over her daughter and fled with her here. But Caesar found her. And what happened to Joanna? Where is she now? June wiped away a tear. I don't know for sure. She disappeared 2 months ago. Before she did, she came to me, desperate, asking me to take care of Sophia if anything happened to her. She gave me a sealed envelope and said, "If I'm not back in a week, give this to the police." But when she didn't come back, I was scared of what might happen to Sophia if I revealed the contents of the envelope. And where is this envelope now? Hidden in my house. It's proof of everything. Documents from the clinic, the contract Joanna signed, photos of her with Caesar, recordings. Joanna documented everything like a life insurance policy. Regina stood up decisively. We need to get that envelope now. It's the missing proof to understand this whole scheme and possibly save Richard. Just then, Sophia approached them, sleepily rubbing her eyes. Aunt June, I'm hungry. June smiled at the girl, trying to hide her worry. Of course, sweetie, let's go to my house. There's good food for you there, and we also need to pick up something important. Regina took out her cell phone. I'll inform Sergeant Carter about this, and I'll ask for a police officer to accompany us. At Sunrise Farm, Carter was organizing the teams to surround the second property, where they believed Richard was being held. Eliza remained in the police car, still in shock from the revelation that Sophia was indeed her husband's daughter. Her cell phone rang. It was Regina. Mrs. Miller, we've discovered something crucial. Cesar Rodriguez is behind all of this. He arranged for Joanna to get pregnant with Richard's genetic material as part of a years-long revenge plan. Cesar Rodriguez, from Sunrise Construction? Yes, ma'am. June has proof of everything at her house. We're heading there now with Sophia. My God, Eliza murmured. The deeper we dig, the dirtier this story gets. After hanging up, Eliza was silent, thinking. For years, she had dreamed of having a child with Richard. She had gone through painful treatments, frustrations, until she finally gave up. And now, too, discover that another woman had borne her husband's child, even under such absurd circumstances. It was a difficult blow to absorb, but there was something else, something that was starting to bother her. If Cesar was using Sophia as an instrument of revenge against Richard, the girl was in danger. And what if Caesar found out the police were closing in? What would he do to Richard? And what if he decided to go after Sophia? Sergeant, she called, getting out of the car hastily. We need to protect the girl. She could be in danger. Carter, who was receiving instructions over the radio, turned to her. Regina just informed me. I've already sent a patrol car to escort them to June's house and back to the station. That's not enough. Caesar is dangerous and obsessive. If he knows we're close to catching him. At that moment, a police officer ran up. Sergeant, we've received information that an armed man was seen approaching June Nascimento's house on the outskirts of town. Carter's face paled. How many men do we have there? Just one, sir, Corporal Mendez, who went to escort the women. Send reinforcements immediately and tell Mendez to get the women out of that house as quickly as possible. Eliza felt her heart clench. The girl, Sophia, was in danger. Richard's daughter, her stepdaughter, technically. An innocent child in the middle of a perverse revenge plot. I want to go there, she said, surprising herself. Mrs. Miller, it's too dangerous. That girl is my husband's daughter. I can't just stand here while she's at risk. Carter hesitated, but seeing the determination in Eliza's eyes, he nodded. All right, But you will stay in the police car at a safe distance, understood? In June's simple house, Regina and Sophia waited while the old woman looked for the hidden envelope. Corporal Mendez stood guard at the front door, visibly nervous after receiving the alert about a possible intruder. "Found it!" June exclaimed, pulling a package from a false bottom in her closet. "It's all here." Just then they heard a noise coming from the backyard. Mendez drew his weapon. "Stay down, away from the windows," he ordered, moving cautiously towards the back of the house. Regina protectively hugged Sophia, while June hid the envelope inside her clothes. Seconds later they heard a dull thud followed by silence. "Corporal Mendez?" Regina called, her voice trembling. No answer. "We have to get out of here," June whispered. "Through the front door now." The three of them moved silently towards the living room, but stopped abruptly upon seeing a figure blocking the door, Cesar Rodriguez, with a cold, calculating expression. "Hello, Mrs. June, it's been a while." June instinctively placed herself in front of Sophia. "What do you want, Cesar? The police already know everything." "Not everything, my dear. Not everything." He took a step forward. "And don't worry about your guard, he's just resting." Regina discreetly pulled out her cell phone, but Cesar noticed the movement. "No calls, please. Now we're all going for a little ride. There's a family reunion that needs to happen." "We're not going anywhere with you," Regina challenged. Cesar smiled coldly, showing an object in his hand that appeared to be a gun. "I'm afraid it's not an invitation, but an order." At the isolated farm, Richard was once again tied to a chair in a dusty room that had once been an office. Thad watched the window nervously, talking on his cell phone. "Boss, there's movement on the road. I think it's police cars." After a moment, he hung up. "What did Cesar say?" Richard asked, trying to gauge the situation. "He's on his way, and he's not coming alone." A sense of dread washed over Richard. Who was Cesar bringing? Not Sophia, he hoped. The thought of a child, his daughter, in the hands of that disturbed man filled him with a terror he had never felt before. "Thad, listen," he tried to reason. "You don't have to be involved in this. Cesar is obsessed. He's going to end up in jail or dead. You can walk away now. Help the police. I'll testify on your behalf. Say you treated me well, that you were coerced." Thad seemed to hesitate, the conflict visible on his face. "It's too late. I'm in too deep. It's never too late to do the right thing." Thad laughed bitterly. "Look who's talking. The man who destroyed hundreds of lives with the stroke of a pen, talking about doing the right thing." Richard lowered his head, ashamed. It was true. How many lives had he negatively affected throughout his career? How many families destabilized? How many dreams destroyed? He had always justified it with the cold logic of business, with the need to grow, expand, profit, more and more. "You're right," he finally admitted. "I've done a lot of wrong in my life. I've hurt people, destroyed dreams, all in the name of success, of profit. But that girl, Sophia, she's innocent. She doesn't deserve to be used as a pawn in this game of revenge." Thad looked at Richard for a long time, as if seeing him truly for the first time. "Is she really your daughter? You really didn't know about her?" "I had no idea. I always believed I was infertile. Having a child was my biggest dream, something I gave up on, a long time ago." The sound of an engine interrupted their conversation. A car was approaching. Thad looked out the window again. "It's him, and there are people in the car." Richard's heart raced. Who had Cesar brought? Sophia? Other hostages? The situation was becoming increasingly dangerous, and he felt completely helpless, tied to that chair. Outside, Cesar parked the car. In the rearview mirror, Richard could see there were at least 3 people in the back seat. June, whom he recognized after a few seconds, Regina, his COO, and between them, a small figure that could only be Sophia. "My God," he murmured, feeling his blood run cold. He brought the girl. Thad also seemed nervous. "This wasn't part of the plan. He said he just wanted to scare you, expose your secret, ruin your reputation, not involve children directly." "He's lost control, Thad. This is going to end badly if we continue. Help me stop him." Before Thad could answer, the door opened and Cesar entered, pushing June, Regina, and Sophia ahead of him. "Well, look at this. A family reunion." The father, the daughter, even the old housekeeper who knows all the dirty secrets. All that's missing is the betrayed wife to complete the picture. Richard looked at Sophia, who seemed frightened, clinging to June's hand. The girl looked at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Her eyes, the same eyes Richard saw in the mirror every morning. There was no doubt she was his daughter. "Caesar, let them go," Richard pleaded. "Your issue is with me." "Oh, no, no, no. Don't you get it yet? This is all about family, Richard. About losing what you love most, just like I lost." "Children are not to blame for the mistakes of adults," June intervened bravely. "You, of all people, should understand that, Caesar." Caesar turned to June, furious. "Don't talk like you know me. You know nothing about me, about what I've been through." "I know more than you think. Joanna told me everything before she disappeared. How you used her, how you set up this whole macabre plan. Joanna talked too much, that's why I had to—" Caesar stopped abruptly, realizing he was about to reveal too much. "What did you do to Joanna?" June asked, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "Nothing that matters now," Caesar replied coldly. "The important thing is that we finally have all the players on the board." At that moment, Sophia let go of June and took a step forward, facing Caesar. "Did you hurt my mummy?" she asked, her voice small but firm. Caesar seemed taken aback by the girl's courage. For an instant, his face betrayed a shadow of remorse. "Your mother is safe, far from here." "Liar!" Sophia shouted, surprising everyone. "You're a bad man. My mommy said you wanted to take me away, that you were going to hurt my daddy." "Sophia," June intervened gently. "Be quiet now, sweetie." But Sophia's outburst seemed to have an effect on Caesar. He looked at the girl as if seeing her truly for the first time, not as an instrument of revenge but as a child, scared and vulnerable, much like the son he had lost. Taking advantage of Caesar's moment of hesitation, Thad stepped forward. "That's enough, Caesar. This has gone too far. Kidnapping, threats, maybe even something worse. This isn't what I signed up for." "Shut up and stay in your place, Thad. You're in this until the end, whether you like it or not." "No, I'm not, and you don't have to be either. There's still time to stop, to do the right thing." Caesar laughed bitterly. "Do the right thing like the great Richard Miller did the right thing when he fired us all, like he did the right thing when he ignored our pleas, our requests for time to find new jobs." "I was wrong," Richard interrupted, his voice filled with genuine emotion. "I made terrible mistakes. I hurt people with my selfish decisions. You have every right to hate me, Caesar, but don't involve innocent people in this. Don't repeat the cycle of pain." Caesar looked at Richard, at Sophia, at everyone in the room. For a moment he seemed to waver, as if considering the words, but then his face hardened again. "It's too late for regrets, Miller. You're going to lose everything just like I did." Just then, they heard the distant sound of approaching sirens. Caesar ran to the window. "Damn it, how did they find us so quickly?" Outside, several police cars were approaching on the road. Carter was leading the operation, with Eliza Miller at a safe distance, as promised. Inside the house, Caesar seemed increasingly desperate. "It's over, Caesar," Regina said calmly. "The police are here. They know everything. The envelope with the proof Joanna left is already with them." Caesar looked at everyone, cornered like a wild animal. His years of planning were crumbling before his eyes. The meticulously planned revenge, the scheme to destroy Richard and everything he loved, all going down the drain. "It's not over yet," he muttered, pulling an object from his pocket. Thad, seeing the situation deteriorating rapidly, made a decision. In a swift move, he lunged at Caesar, trying to stop him. The two struggled briefly, falling to the floor with a dull thud. Taking advantage of the confusion, June grabbed Sophia and ran to a corner of the room, shielding her with her body. Regina rushed to Richard, trying to untie him. "Are you okay?" she asked, struggling with the knots. "Yes, but hurry. We need to get Sophia out of here," Richard replied, his eyes fixed on the girl who he was now certain was his daughter. Thad and Caesar continued to fight on the floor when a deafening sound echoed through the room, causing everyone to freeze. A second of absolute silence followed, as if time itself had stopped. The gunshot echoed through the dusty room of the abandoned farmhouse. For an endless moment, no one moved. Sophia buried her face in June's shoulder, who held her protectively. Richard, still partially tied, stared at the scene before him, Caesar and Thad lying on the floor, motionless. It was Regina who broke the silence, moving quickly to check on the two men. "He's alive," she said, kneeling beside Thad, who was moaning softly. The bullet grazed his shoulder. Caesar was conscious, but paralyzed with shock. The gun he was holding had gone off during the struggle, hitting his own accomplice. At that moment, the front door burst open, with a crash, and Sergeant Carter entered with 3 other officers, guns drawn. "Police, nobody move! Careful, he's armed!" Regina shouted, pointing at Caesar. The officers quickly subdued Caesar, disarming and handcuffing him. Another officer checked on Thad, who was still on the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "We need an ambulance!" the officer yelled outside. Carter rushed to Richard, finishing untying the ropes that bound him. "Are you all right, Mr. Miller?" Richard nodded, rubbing his sore wrists. "Yes, I am, but the girl, Sophia—" His gaze shifted to the corner where June still held the small girl, who was trembling visibly. Something inside Richard broke at the sight of the fear in the child's, his daughter's, eyes. A protective instinct he never knew he possessed surged with overwhelming force. Without a second thought, he stood up and walked towards them. June watched him with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Sophia," Richard said, kneeling to be at the girl's level. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Sophia looked up at him with her large brown eyes, the same eyes Richard saw in the mirror every morning. The resemblance was undeniable, and feeling her so close, so real, brought a lump to his throat. "No," Sophia answered in a low voice, "but I'm scared." "You don't have to be scared anymore. The bad men can't hurt you now. The police are here, and I'm here too." He hesitantly held out his hand, unsure of how to act. "What do you say to a daughter you've just discovered? How do you comfort a child who has been through so much fear and confusion?" To his surprise, Sophia took a small step forward, and instead of taking his hand, she hugged him. A simple, pure hug. The hug of a child who, without fully understanding the situation, instinctively felt a bond. "Are you really my daddy?" she asked, her voice muffled against Richard's shoulder. Richard felt tears burn his eyes. He, who hadn't cried since childhood, who had built a fortress around his heart to survive in the ruthless business world. "Yes, Sophia, it seems I am your father, but I didn't know about you until now. Mommy said you would come for me one day, that you were important and lived in a big city." Richard exchanged a look with June, who was watching the scene with tears in her eyes. "Your mother too? Where is she, Sophia?" The girl looked down, sadness evident on her face. "I don't know, she went away. She said she had to solve a problem, that she'd be back soon. But she didn't come back." June intervened gently. "Caesar must know where she is. He practically confessed to doing something to Joanna." Carter, who was overseeing Caesar's arrest, approached. "We'll interrogate him at the station. If he knows anything about Joanna Nascimento's disappearance, we'll find out." Just then, Eliza Miller entered the house, ignoring the officer's instructions to stay in the car. Her eyes quickly scanned the scene until they found Richard, kneeling, hugging a small girl. The sight made her stop abruptly, as if she had hit an invisible wall. "Richard," she called, her voice betraying the emotion she was trying to control. Richard stood up, still holding Sophia's hand. "Eliza, you're here." The two looked at each other for a long moment, 28 years of marriage, secrets, and unspoken grievances hanging between them. Then Eliza's gaze fell to Sophia, who was watching her curiously. "So it's true," Eliza said finally. "The girl is your daughter." It wasn't a question, but a painful statement. "Yes," Richard replied simply. "But I didn't know, Eliza. I swear I didn't know." Eliza took a few steps forward, approaching cautiously. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of pain, jealousy, curiosity, and, surprisingly, a hint of tenderness as she observed Sophia more closely. "Hello?" she said to Sophia, trying to soften her usually authoritative voice. "My name is Eliza." "Hi," Sophia replied shyly. "Are you my daddy's friend?" The innocent question struck Eliza like an arrow. his friend. How could she explain to a 7-year-old the complexity of a nearly 3-decade marriage, marked by initial love, then the disappointment of infertility, followed by years of cold, distant coexistence? I'm his wife," she finally answered. Sophia nodded, processing the information with the simple logic of a child. "So you're my mommy too?" Eliza looked at Richard, clearly unsure how to respond. It was June who intervened gently. "Sophia, dear, remember we talked about this? Your mother is Joanna. Mrs. Eliza is married to your father, which makes her your stepmother." Sophia frowned, confused. "Like in the stories. But aren't stepmothers mean?" Despite the gravity of the situation, Richard couldn't suppress a small smile. The girl's innocence, her worldview still shaped by fairy tales, contrasted sharply with the sordid reality they had just experienced. "Not all stepmothers are mean, Sophia," he said softly, "just like not all fathers are perfect." He looked at Eliza, a silent communication passing between them. There was much to be discussed, explained, resolved, but not at that moment. Carter approached the group. "We need to take everyone to the station. There are statements to be taken, and this place isn't safe." Richard nodded, still holding Sophia's hand. "Let's go, then." On the way out, as the police escorted a handcuffed Caesar to a patrol car, he looked at Richard with a mixture of hatred and defeat. "This isn't over, Miller. You may have escaped today, but everyone is going to know your dirty little secret. How the great Richard Miller hid a daughter for years, how he cheated on his wife with a little maid." "Shut up," one of the officers ordered, pushing him into the car. But the damage was done. Caesar's words hung in the air like poison. Eliza, who was walking ahead, paused for a moment, her rigid back betraying the impact of the accusations. Richard knew that while the truth was more complex, Caesar's words contained enough seeds of truth to hurt deeply. On the way to the station, Richard, Eliza, Sophia, and June rode in a separate car, escorted by a patrol car. The silence inside the vehicle was heavy, broken only by Sophia's occasional questions about the passing landscape. "Are those your cows, Daddy?" she asked at one point, pointing to a pasture where some cattle were grazing peacefully. The word "daddy" still sounded strange to Richard's ears, wonderful and frightening at the same time. For years he had dreamed of being called that, of having a son or daughter to call his own. Now that it was finally happening, it was under circumstances so different from what he had imagined. "No, they're not mine," he answered with a smile. "I live in New York, a very big city that's different from here." "Are there cows in New York?" "Not many," Richard laughed, "but there are lots of tall buildings, parks, malls." "What are malls?" The innocence of the question melted something inside Richard. This girl, his daughter, had grown up in a world so different from his. Without the privileges he would have given a child, without the opportunities, without the material comforts he considered basic. They're big places where people go to buy clothes, toys, food. Some of them have amusement parks inside. Sophia's eyes lit up. "Amusement parks? With a Ferris wheel?" "Yes, with a Ferris wheel, roller coasters, carousels." "I've seen a carousel. There was one at the town fair last year. My mommy took me." Richard felt a pang in his chest. Joanna, Sophia's mother, who had disappeared for some reason. What role would he play in Sophia's life now? And what if Joanna reappeared? What would his rights be? From the front seat, Eliza watched the interaction in the rearview mirror. Her face was an impenetrable mask, but her eyes revealed the storm within. When they arrived at the station, they were greeted by Regina, who had gone ahead to coordinate logistics. She approached Eliza, speaking in a low voice. "I've prepared everything for our return to New York. The helicopter is waiting. It can take us to the airport today, and from there we'll take the jet." Eliza nodded mechanically, but her gaze was on Richard and Sophia, who were entering the station hand in hand as if they had known each other for years, instead of hours. Inside the station, a medical team was attending to Thad, whose wound was fortunately not serious. Caesar was in an interrogation room, being questioned by Sergeant Carter. Richard was led to a separate room to give his statement, while Sophia stayed with June in the common area, drinking hot chocolate and eating cookies someone had brought. Eliza stood in the middle of the hallway, suddenly unsure of where to go, what her role was in this extraordinary situation. After a moment's hesitation, she decided to join June and Sophia. "May I sit?" she asked formally, indicating an empty chair beside them. June nodded, watching her with wise, understanding eyes. "Of course, Mrs. Eliza. Sophia, make room for Mrs. Eliza to sit." Sophia moved obediently, looking at Eliza with childlike curiosity, without the suspicion or resentment an adult would have in a similar situation. "Do you live in the big city too?" she asked. Eliza, caught off guard by the direct question, answered after a moment. "Yes, I live in New York, with your father." "Is it pretty there?" "Very pretty. We have a big house with a garden, a swimming pool." "A swimming pool?" "A real one, like at the club?" Eliza smiled involuntarily. There was something disarming about Sophia's innocence, the way her eyes widened at the mention of things that to Eliza were absolutely commonplace. "Yes, a real one. Bigger than the one at the club, I imagine." "I don't know how to swim very well," Sophia confessed. "Aunt Judy took me to the pond once, but it was crowded and she was afraid I would drown." "Well, pools are safer than ponds, and you can have teachers to teach you how to swim properly." The two continued to talk, gradually establishing a surprisingly natural connection, while June watched with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The situation was too complex to predict how it would end. In the interrogation room, Caesar finally broke after hours of questioning. "She's alive," he admitted, referring to Joanna. "She's at a farm near Montgomery, an isolated place." "Under what conditions?" Carter asked, trying to contain his anger. "She's being held, but treated well. All I wanted was to keep her away until I completed my plan." "Which was what exactly?" Caesar laughed bitterly. "To destroy Richard Miller, to make him feel the same pain I felt when I lost everything, my job, my house, my son." His voice broke on the last word. "And the girl. What did you plan to do with Sophia?" "No harm," Caesar replied, seeming genuinely offended by the insinuation. "I would never hurt a child. I just wanted to use her to expose Richard, destroy his reputation, his marriage, his company, to reveal to the world that the great Richard Miller hid a daughter for years, that he's infertile, that he deceived everyone. Even if it destroyed the life of an innocent girl." Caesar looked down for the first time, appearing ashamed. I didn't think much about that. I was blinded by hatred." Carter jotted down the coordinates of the location where Joanna was being held and left to organize a rescue operation. In the hallway, he found Richard, who had just finished his statement. "We found Joanna," the sergeant informed him. "She's alive, in an isolated farmhouse near Montgomery. I'm organizing a team to get her right now." Richard felt immense relief. For Sophia, mainly. The girl didn't deserve to lose her mother. "How long until you bring her here?" "A few hours, if all goes well. Are you planning to—" "Wait?" It was an important question. The helicopter was ready to take them back to the airport, where the private jet awaited to return them to New York, to go back to his normal life, to leave this nightmare behind. But could he just leave? Abandon Sophia now that he knew the truth? And what would he say to Joanna when she was rescued? "I'll wait," he finally decided. "I need to talk to Joanna." Carter nodded, respecting the decision. "I'll arrange accommodations for you and your family." The word family echoed in Richard's mind. Family, something he thought he never had, at least not in the traditional sense. He and Eliza were a partnership, an alliance, but they had stopped being a real family a long time ago. Returning to the station's common area, he found a surprising scene. Eliza and Sophia, sitting side by side, chatting animatedly. Sophia was showing her rag doll to Eliza, who was examining it with genuine interest. "Lulu has been with me since I was a baby," Sophia explained. "Mommy made her from scraps of cloth. Her eyes are buttons from an old shirt. It's very beautiful work," Eliza commented, turning the doll in her hands. "Your mother is talented." Richard approached hesitantly, almost afraid to interrupt this unexpected moment of connection. "They found Joanna," he announced. "She's okay. They're going to get her now." Sophia's face lit up instantly. My mommy. She's coming back. Yes, Sophia. In a few hours, she'll be here. The girl jumped from her chair, hugging her doll tightly. Did you hear that, Lulu? Mommy's coming back. Eliza stood up as well, her face returning to its neutral, controlled expression. So we should wait? She asked Richard, her voice carefully devoid of any emotion. I think so. I need to talk to Joanna, understand the whole situation before we decide anything. June, who was watching everything, approached. If you'd like, you can wait at my house. It's simple, but clean and comfortable. Better than staying in this station all day. Richard looked at Eliza, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We appreciate the invitation, Mrs. June, Richard replied. For the rest of the afternoon, a strange routine settled in at June's simple house. Sophia, seemingly having forgotten the recent trauma, played in the small yard, feeding the chickens and picking guavas from a tree. Richard watched her from the window, amazed at her resilience, at the ease with which she found joy in simple things. Eliza remained more reserved, sitting on the porch, taking occasional calls from Regina, who had returned to New York to manage the crisis at the company. News of Richard Miller's kidnapping was already starting to leak to the press, and speculation about the motives was multiplying. For now, we're denying anything beyond the kidnapping itself, Regina reported over the phone. But it's a matter of time before they find out about the girl, especially if this Caesar character starts talking. Leave it to me, Eliza replied. We're waiting for the girl's mother to be rescued. After that, we'll make decisions on how to proceed. After hanging up, she found Richard standing in the doorway to the porch, watching her. What are we going to do, Eliza? He asked, his voice low so Sophia, playing in the yard, wouldn't hear. About all of this. About Sophia. Eliza sighed, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair, a rare gesture that betrayed her nervousness. I don't know, Richard. Honestly, I don't know. 24 hours ago, it was just the two of us, as it has been for the last 30 years. Now suddenly you have a daughter you didn't even know existed. Do you believe me? That I didn't know? Eliza looked at him for a long time, as if assessing his sincerity. I believe you. Knowing you, if you had known you had a daughter, you would have done something about it, even if it was just sending money from afar. Richard nodded, grateful for this vote of confidence, however minimal. And now that I know, what should I do? What do you want to do, Richard? The question caught him off. God, what did he want? He had never really stopped to think about it. His life had always been guided by what he should do, by what was expected of him, by what was strategically advantageous. To want, to desire something out of pure will, pure instinct. It was uncharted territory. I want to know her, he finally answered, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. I want to be a part of her life somehow. I want to be a father to her. Eliza observed him with an indefinable expression. Even if it complicates our lives, causes scandals, affects the company, our public image? Yes, even so. Why? What's changed, Richard? You've always been so pragmatic. Richard looked at Sophia, who was now chasing a chicken in the yard, laughing carefree. Maybe I'm tired of being pragmatic, of living just to accumulate more money, more power, more status. When I was in that abandoned farmhouse, tied up, facing the possibility of not making it out alive, I realized how empty my life has been, how I've built an empire that really means nothing. Eliza seemed surprised by her husband's unusual frankness. I've never heard you talk like this. I never had time to think about it before, or maybe I never had the courage to admit it. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. And you? Richard finally asked. What do you want to do? Eliza looked at Sophia, a soft expression appearing on her usually controlled face. I don't know. I always wanted a child, you know that. I went through so many treatments, so many dashed hopes. I accepted the idea that I would never be a mother. And now, to find out that you have a daughter with another woman? It wasn't like that, Eliza. You heard the story. It was a medical procedure without my knowledge. I know. Rationally, I understand that. But emotionally, it's complicated. Richard nodded, understanding. For Eliza, who had dreamed of being a mother for so many years, learning that another woman had borne her husband's child, even under the extraordinary circumstances described, was a difficult blow. I'm not asking you to accept everything at once, he said softly. I don't even know how to handle all of this myself. I just know that I can't just turn my back and pretend nothing happened. She looks like you, Eliza commented, surprising him. The same eyes, the same way of frowning when she's concentrating. Richard smiled. I noticed that too, and she's smart, articulate for her age. I imagine what she would be like if she'd had the opportunities we could have given her. We still can. Eliza's response, simple and direct, caught Richard by surprise. What do you mean? I don't know exactly. It will depend a lot on the conversation with Joanna, on legal arrangements, on many things. But I'm not a monster, Richard. I'm not going to stop you from being her father in some way. Richard felt a wave of gratitude and affection for Eliza. Despite all the difficulties in their marriage, the years of emotional distance, she was still capable of surprising him with her strength and dignity. Thank you, he said simply. The sound of an approaching car interrupted their conversation. They looked out the window and saw a police car parking in front of the house. Sergeant Carter got out, followed by a young woman, looking exhausted but relieved. "Mommy!" Sophia shouted, immediately dropping what she was doing and running towards the woman. "Sophia, my love!" Joanna opened her arms, kneeling to receive her daughter in a tight embrace. "Thank God you're okay. I was so scared." The two remained embraced for a long moment, both crying. Richard and Eliza watched from the porch, feeling almost like intruders in such an intimate, emotional moment. When they finally separated, Joanna looked up and saw Richard. The color seemed to drain from her face. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice trembling. "So it's true. You found out." Richard descended the porch steps, approaching cautiously. "Yes, Joanna, I found out in the worst way possible. But the important thing is that we're all okay now. Caesar is in custody. He can't threaten anyone anymore." Joanna nodded, still holding Sophia protectively. "I tried to stop him. When I found out what he was planning to do, I tried to run away with Sophia. But he found us. He kept me locked up in an isolated farmhouse, said Sophia would be safe with her Aunt Judy until he carried out his plan." "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Richard asked. "When you found out Sophia was my daughter." Joanna looked down, ashamed. "I was scared. At first I didn't know she was yours. Caesar convinced me to undergo a medical procedure, said it was for a rich couple who couldn't have children and would pay well. Only later, when Sophia was born and I saw how much she looked like you, did I start to suspect." "And why didn't you say anything?" "Because Caesar threatened me. He said if I told the truth he would harm Sophia and me. He said you were a powerful man, that you would sue me, that you would take my daughter from me. And I believed him. I was alone, scared." Richard felt a pang of guilt. His reputation as a tough, ruthless man preceded him. It was no surprise that a young woman like Joanna would fear his reaction. "I understand. But now we need to talk, all of us. There are many decisions to be made." June, who was at the door, intervened. "Why don't you all come inside? I've made some coffee and we can talk calmly." The group went into the modest house. Sophia, holding her mother's hand, seemed confused by the palpable tension in the air. "Mommy, is the man from the motel really my daddy?" she asked innocently. Joanna looked at Richard, then at Sophia. "Yes, honey. Mr. Miller is your biological father." "And is that pretty lady my stepmother?" "Yes, that's Mrs. Eliza, his wife. She showed me pictures of their house in New York. It has a pool, Mom, a real one." Joanna smiled sadly, stroking her daughter's hair. "That's nice, my love. Now why don't you go play in the yard a little longer while the grown-ups talk?" Sophia nodded, picking up her doll and obediently heading outside. When the door closed behind her, Joanna turned to Richard and Eliza. What do you want from me, from Sophia? The question, direct and filled with fear, caught Richard off guard. We don't want anything you're not willing to give, Joanna. I've just discovered I have a daughter. I'm still processing it. Are you going to take her from me? No, Richard answered immediately. Of course not. Sophia needs her mother. But she also needs her father, Eliza added, surprising everyone with her intervention. Somehow, we need to find a balance. Joanna looked at Eliza, studying her. You're not angry? You don't hate me for having a child with your husband? Eliza hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I'm confused, Joanna. Hurt, perhaps, but not at you, not directly. You were also a victim in this whole story. We all were, Richard said. César manipulated all of us for years, feeding his hatred and planning his revenge. He used you. He used Sophia. He used our secrets and weaknesses against us. A heavy silence fell over the room, each person lost in their own thoughts. It was June who finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. What matters now is Sophia. What future do we want for her? The question hung in the air, simple and devastating in its importance. What future for Sophia? The cheerful, resilient girl who, despite all the hardships, still found reasons to smile, to play, to love unconditionally. 3 months had passed since the dramatic events in Good Hope, Alabama. Winter was arriving in New York City, bringing gray days and cool temperatures. In Richard and Eliza's penthouse on the Upper East Side, a small revolution had taken place. The guest room, once impersonal and rarely used, had been transformed into a child's bedroom, with soft lilac walls, a canopy bed, shelves filled with books and toys, and a desk for studying. Richard was adjusting a picture. On the wall, a framed photo of Sophia on her first day at her new school, wearing a pristine uniform and a radiant smile. Beside it, a second photo showed Sophia, Joanna, Richard and Eliza together at a Sunday lunch. An unconventional family, brought together by extraordinary circumstances. It's crooked, Eliza observed, entering the room with a pile of folded clothes. A little more to the right. Richard adjusted the frame, smiling at his wife. Better. Perfect. Sophia arrives in an hour. Joanna called to say they're on their way to the airport. The arrangement they had established was unusual, but it worked surprisingly well. Sophia lived primarily with Joanna, who now occupied a comfortable apartment in a good neighborhood, paid for by Richard as part of the child support agreement. The girl spent 2 weeks a month with her father and Eliza in New York, as well as holidays and part of her school breaks. Richard also visited Alabama regularly, taking the opportunity to get to know his daughter in her everyday environment. The first few months had not been easy. The press had discovered the story, creating sensational headlines about the real estate tycoon's secret heir and the double life of Richard Miller. The scandal had shaken the financial market, causing the company's stock to temporarily plummet. Richard had been forced to make a public statement, explaining the extraordinary circumstances that had led to Sophia's existence without his knowledge. To the surprise of many, Eliza had stood by his side during the press conference, displaying a unity rarely seen between the couple in recent years. She had spoken briefly, with dignity and firmness. Sophia is an innocent child who deserves all the love and support we can give her. We will not allow her to be harmed by adults who should have protected her. The line, repeated exhaustively in the news, had transformed the narrative of the story. From a sordid scandal to a family drama, Eliza had managed to change the public perception with a few well-chosen words. Now, as she prepared the room for another of Sophia's visits, Eliza reflected on how her life had changed in recent months. Her relationship with Richard, once a cordial but distant partnership, had gained new life. They talked more, shared more. Sophia's presence had created common ground, something that united them beyond business and social appearances. "What are you thinking?" "About," Richard asked, noticing her distant gaze. "About how much everything has changed, how we've changed." Richard nodded, understanding. "For the better, don't you think?" "Yes," Eliza replied, smiling faintly. "Surprisingly better." The phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Regina, the COO, now promoted to Executive Vice President of the company. "Mr. Miller, we have an update on the foundation project." "Excellent, Regina. Tell me." "The board has approved it unanimously. We can begin operations next quarter." "Wonderful. Let Mrs. June know. She will be crucial in implementing everything as planned." After hanging up, Richard seemed genuinely enthusiastic, a rare expression on his previously always controlled and serious face. "Good news?" Eliza asked. "The best. The board approved the Sophia Nascimento Miller Foundation. We can start implementing the support programs for low-income families, scholarships, access to quality healthcare." The idea for the foundation had emerged a few weeks after the incident in Good Hope. Richard, profoundly changed by the experience, had decided to use part of his fortune to make a positive difference in the lives of underprivileged children, especially in remote regions of the American South. The foundation's name was a tribute to the daughter who had changed his perspective on life. "June will do an excellent job as the local director," Eliza commented, who had surprisingly supported the project from the beginning. "She knows the needs of the region like no one else." "And her heart is in the right place," Richard added. "Without her, I don't know what would have happened to Sophia all those years." June, the former housekeeper who had played a crucial role in connecting all the dots of the story, had accepted the invitation to direct the foundation's operations in the South. Her knowledge of the region, combined with her integrity and dedication to social causes, made her perfect for the role. "How is the case against Cesar going?" Eliza asked as she arranged some stuffed animals on Sophia's bed. "It's moving forward. The trial is set for next month. He's facing charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, extortion, among others. Thad took a plea deal, provided all the details of the scheme." "Are you going to testify?" "Yes, although I'm not looking forward to it, reliving all of that." Eliza approached, placing a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of intimacy that would have been unlikely a few months ago. "It will be difficult, but necessary. And after that, it will be the final closure of this chapter." Richard covered her hand with his, grateful for the support. "I still wonder if, in some way, I deserve this. Caesar's hatred didn't come from nowhere. My business decisions really did ruin lives. Perhaps. But you're changing that now. The foundation, the new low-income housing projects, the outplacement policy for laid-off employees. You're correcting past mistakes." Richard nodded thoughtfully. Since the kidnapping, a profound transformation had occurred in him. The ruthless businessman, obsessed with profits and expansion, had given way to a more reflective man, more aware of the impact of his actions on the world. Sophia had been the catalyst for this change, but the experience of being completely vulnerable, of facing his own failures and limitations, had transformed him in ways even he didn't fully understand yet. "You're right," he said finally. "I can't change the past, but I can build a different future. For Sophia, for the people the foundation will help, even for the two of us." The intercom buzzed, announcing the arrival of visitors. "Already?" Eliza said, surprised, looking at the clock. "They're early." Richard answered the intercom, authorizing their entry. Minutes later, hurried footsteps were heard in the hallway, and Sophia burst through the door like a hurricane of energy. "Dad! Eliza!" she shouted, running to hug them. Richard knelt to receive her in his arms, spinning her in the air as she laughed joyfully. Then Sophia hugged Eliza, who was still surprised by the naturalness with which the girl had accepted her into her life. Joanna entered right behind, carrying a small suitcase. "Sorry, we're early. The flight was ahead of schedule, and she was so excited we came straight here." "We're so glad you're here," Eliza said, helping her with the suitcase. "We just finished getting everything ready." Joanna looked around, admiring the room. "It's beautiful. Sophia hasn't stopped talking about this room since her last visit." The two women exchanged smiles. The relationship between Eliza and Joanna, initially tense and fraught with discomfort, had evolved into mutual respect and even an unexpected friendship. Both put Sophia's well-being above any potential resentment or jealousy. "Dad, can I show Mom the present you gave me last time?" Sophia asked, pulling Richard's hand. "Of course, Princess. It's on the shelf, right where you left it." Sophia ran to the shelf and carefully picked up an illuminated globe. "Look, Mom, When you turn off the lights, you can see all the stars and constellations. How beautiful, sweetie, Joanna exclaimed, admiring the object. Dad said he's going to take me to see the real stars with a giant telescope. At the observatory, Richard corrected gently. At the New York Observatory. It's scheduled for the next weekend you're here. It's going to be so cool. I'm already studying the names of the constellations. Did you know Orion is a hunter? And that the Big Dipper looks like a pot? The adults laughed at the girl's excitement. It was remarkable how Sophia had blossomed in recent months. Always intelligent and curious, she now had access to educational resources that Joanna could never have provided alone. She attended an excellent school, took English, swimming and ballet lessons, and showed a special talent for science. Sophia, why don't you go put your things in the dresser while we talk for a bit? Eliza suggested. The girl nodded and began to unpack her small suitcase, meticulously organizing her clothes and toys brought from home. The three adults moved to the living room where they could talk more privately. How is she adjusting to the new school? Richard asked, pouring Joanna a glass of water. Wonderfully. The teachers are impressed with her. They say she's one of the best students in her class, especially in science and math. She gets that from her father, Eliza commented. Richard always had a knack for numbers. And for languages, too. She's advancing quickly in her English. The teacher suggested we start a second foreign language next year. Richard smiled, proud. Fatherhood, which had come so unexpectedly into his life, had turned out to be a source of joy he had never imagined possible. Every one of Sophia's achievements, every new interest she developed, every word of affection she directed at him, Dad still sounded like music to his ears, filled him with a feeling that transcended any business success he had ever achieved. "And what about you, Joanna? How's the new job?" Eliza asked. Joanna, who had previously worked as a maid, was now an administrative assistant at a medical clinic, a job Richard had helped her get, but which she kept on her own merit. "I'm loving it. I started a technical course in administration at night. My boss said that when I finish, I could be promoted to administrative manager." "That's excellent," Richard commented. "If you need any help with your studies or anything else—" "Thank you, but I'm managing well," Joanna replied with a determined smile. "I want to achieve things on my own to show Sophia the value of hard work." Richard nodded, respecting her position. One of the first lessons he had learned in their new family arrangement was to respect Joanna's independence. Although he provided financial comfort for Sophia through a generous support payment, he avoided interfering in the mother's decisions about her daughter's upbringing. "We received news about Caesar today," Richard commented, changing the subject. "The trial starts next month." Joanna visibly flinched at the mention of the name. "He's going to be in prison for a long time, right?" "According to the prosecutors, the evidence is overwhelming. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, attempted extortion. It will be many years of incarceration." "Good." Joanna breathed a sigh of relief. "Finally, we can turn that page for good." "Do you plan to tell Sophia the whole truth someday?" Eliza asked. "About how she was conceived, about Caesar's plan?" Joanna and Richard exchanged worried glances. It was a question they had discussed a few times without reaching a definitive conclusion. "I think so, eventually," Joanna replied, "when she's older and can understand, but not the sordid details, just enough for her to know her origins." "I agree," Richard said. "She has the right to know her story, but in a way that doesn't hurt her or make her feel different." "She's already different," Eliza commented with a soft smile. "Extraordinarily special." The sincere comment surprised both Joanna and Richard. Eliza's transformation in recent months had been as remarkable as Richard's. From initial rejection and shock, she had gradually come to accept Sophia into her life, then to appreciate her presence, and finally to develop a genuine affection for the girl. "Thank you, Eliza," Joanna said, her voice emotional, "for everything. I know it couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't at first," Eliza admitted honestly. "But Sophia, she has a way of getting into people's hearts, and I realized that life gave me, in a completely unexpected way, something I had always wanted, a child to love." Eliza's eyes welled up. a rare occurrence for such a usually controlled woman. Richard took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You've both been so generous to me," Joanna continued. "You could have turned this into a legal battle, tried to take Sophia from me, but instead, we formed an unconventional family," Richard completed, "one that works surprisingly well." Just then, Sophia ran into the room carrying an astronomy book. "Dad, can we go to the planetarium tomorrow? There's a special exhibit on black holes." "Of course we can," Richard replied, smiling at his daughter. "We'll all go together." "All of us?" Sophia asked, looking at Eliza and Joanna. "If your mother wants to stay in New York one more day, yes." "All of us," Richard confirmed. Joanna nodded, smiling at her daughter. "I can call work and tell them I'll be back a day later. I think I want to learn about black holes too." "Yay!" Sophia cheered, hugging her mother. "It's going to be the best trip ever." As Sophia excitedly explained about black holes and neutron stars, using scientific terms with surprising accuracy for a 7-year-old, the three adults exchanged looks of mutual understanding. They had come a long way since the dramatic events in Good Hope. From strangers united by extraordinary circumstances, they had become a family. Different, complex, but united by Sophia's well-being. Later that evening, after dinner, while Sophia was taking a bath before bed, Richard received a call from June. "Mr. Richard, we just received the official paperwork. The Sophia Foundation is officially registered and ready to begin operations." "That's wonderful, June. And please stop calling me Mr. After everything we've been through together, we're practically family." "Old habits," the elderly woman laughed. "How is our girl?" "She's great, getting smarter and more curious every day. Tomorrow we're all going to the planetarium to learn about black holes, at her request." "That's wonderful. Sophia deserves all this happiness after everything she's been through." "We all do, June, including you. How are things in Good Hope?" "Improving little by little. The school renovation project has already started, and the kids are excited about the new library. Next month we're opening the health clinic." Richard felt a wave of genuine satisfaction. The Sophia Foundation, in addition to its educational and health projects, was revitalizing Good Hope, bringing opportunities and hope to a historically neglected region. "I can't wait to visit with Sophia. She'll love to see the impact the project is having. And the people here will love to meet her. After all, she's the inspiration behind all of this." After hanging up, Richard found Eliza on the penthouse balcony, enjoying the nighttime view of New York City. "Good news?" she asked. "Great news. The foundation is officially registered. The projects in Good Hope are already underway." Eliza smiled, genuinely pleased. She herself had become deeply involved in the foundation's projects, especially those related to girls' education. "I never imagined we'd be here," she commented, looking at the illuminated city below them. "A few months ago, we were two people living under the same roof, more for convenience and appearances than for real choice. And now? Now we're a family, a strange, different but real family." Richard approached, hugging her from behind, another gesture that would have been unthinkable in the recent past. "Thank you," he said softly, "for accepting all of this, for accepting Sophia." Eliza turned to face him. "Don't thank me for that. Sophia was an unexpected gift for all of us. She brought back something I thought we had lost forever." "What?" "Love. Purpose. The ability to care about something beyond ourselves and our business." Richard nodded, understanding perfectly. "She changed everything, didn't she? That little girl running desperately through the streets of Good Hope, looking for a father she didn't even know she had." "She changed everything for the better," Eliza confirmed. An excited shout interrupted the moment. "Dad! Eliza! Come see the moon! It's huge tonight!" Sophia was in her room, leaning out the window, wearing the star-patterned pajamas Eliza had bought for her. The couple exchanged a knowing smile before answering the call of the little amateur astronomer. In the room, Sophia pointed enthusiastically at the full moon, hanging majestically over the city. "Look, you can see the craters, and if we had a telescope, we could see so much more." "Noted," Richard said, making a mental note to get a telescope next week. "Tomorrow at the planetarium, we'll see much more than the moon." Are we going to see the black holes? Sophia asked, bouncing with excitement. Projections of them, yes, Eliza explained. No one can see a real black hole because they suck in even light. I know, that's why they're black, Sophia exclaimed. But scientists managed to take a picture of one in 2019. I saw it in my book. Richard and Eliza exchanged admiring glances. Sophia's intelligence and thirst for knowledge were impressive. Time for bed, young lady, Joanna announced, entering the room. We have a big day ahead of us tomorrow. Oh, Mom, just 5 more minutes looking at the moon, please, Joanna smiled, unable to resist those pleading eyes, the same eyes as Richard. All right, 5 minutes, then straight to bed. As Sophia turned her attention back to the moon, the 3 adults watched, each lost in their own thoughts. For Joanna, it was the relief of seeing her daughter happy and safe, with opportunities she could never have provided alone. The initial fear of losing Sophia to Richard and Eliza had been replaced by gratitude that they had formed a partnership instead of a competition. For Eliza, it was the surprise of discovering a space in her heart she didn't know existed, the love for a child who was not biologically hers, but who had become in many ways her daughter too. The motherhood she had so longed for had arrived in an unexpected and unconventional way, but was no less real for it. For Richard, it was the complete transformation of his worldview. The man who had built an empire based on numbers, profits, and expansion now found his greatest joy in the small moments. A hug from Sophia, a shared discovery, the simple pleasure of being present in his daughter's life. 5 minutes are up, starlet, Joanna said softly. Time for sleep. Sophia sighed dramatically but obeyed, moving away from the window and climbing into bed. Lulu, the rag doll that had been with her since she was a baby, waited patiently on the pillow. Can I get a good-night kiss from each of you? She asked, smiling strategically. Of course you can, Richard replied, approaching to kiss her forehead. Sleep well, princess. Tomorrow. We have a day full of stars and black holes. Eliza was next, tucking the covers around Sophia. Sweet dreams, dear. If you need anything during the night, we're right next door. Finally, Joanna hugged her daughter for a long time. I love you, my love. More than all the stars in the sky. I love you too, Mom. And I love Dad. And Eliza too. The simple, direct declaration, typical of childhood honesty, moved the 3 adults. Joanna turned off the light, leaving only the moon-shaped nightlight on, another gift from Eliza. At the door, Richard looked back one last time, watching Sophia cuddled up with her doll, her eyes already heavy with sleep. His daughter. A life he had helped create, without even knowing. A miracle that had arrived in the most unexpected way possible. Good night, Dad, Sophia murmured, already half asleep. Good night, daughter, Richard replied, his heart overflowing with a love he had never imagined he was capable of feeling. In the living room, the 3 adults talked for a few more hours, planning the future, discussing Sophia's education, sharing hopes and concerns. It was not a traditional family. An ex-lover, a husband, and his wife sitting comfortably in the same room. But it worked. For Sophia's sake, they had overcome resentment, jealousy, and social conventions. Late that night, when Joanna finally retired to the guest room, Richard and Eliza remained on the balcony, contemplating the city. You know what's most ironic? Richard commented. Caesar wanted to destroy me, to use Sophia to ruin my life, my marriage, my company. But in the end, he gave us the greatest gift of all, Eliza completed. A daughter, a family, a purpose greater than ourselves. Exactly. His revenge turned out to be our salvation. A comfortable silence settled between them. New York City stretched out below, vast and illuminated, full of lives and stories intertwined by coincidences, choices, and unexpected consequences. When Sophia said, "My daddy is here," that day in Good Hope, she had no idea how much that sentence would change our lives, Richard reflected. Maybe on some level she knew, Eliza suggested. Children sometimes have a wisdom that we adults lose. Richard smiled, hugging his wife. Life had given him a second chance, as a father, as a husband, as a human being. A chance to right wrongs, to build something meaningful, to leave a legacy that transcended buildings and fortunes. "My daddy is here," he repeated softly like a promise, "and he always will be." The next morning the day dawned bright and clear, as if the universe were conspiring to make the trip to the planetarium even more special. Sophia woke up early, brimming with energy and excitement. "Good morning, family," she exclaimed as she entered the kitchen, where Richard was making breakfast while Eliza and Joanna discussed the day's plans. Family. The word, so simple and yet so complex, perfectly summarized the extraordinary journey they had taken. From strangers united by unlikely circumstances to an unconventional but genuine family unit. As he watched Sophia excitedly explaining constellations to Joanna and Eliza, Richard reflected on the winding paths that life sometimes takes. The suffering, the mistakes, the seemingly cruel coincidences, all of it could, surprisingly, lead to a place of redemption and joy. "Is everyone ready to explore the universe?" he asked, placing pancakes on Sophia's plate. "Yes," the girl replied enthusiastically. "We're going to see the stars, the planets, the black holes, and everything. And afterward we can stop by the mall," Eliza suggested, "to buy that astronaut backpack you saw last week." Sophia's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Really? The one with the helmet and everything?" "Really," Eliza confirmed, smiling at Joanna, who nodded in approval. "This is going to be the best day ever," Sophia declared, attacking her pancakes with renewed enthusiasm. Richard smiled, watching his improbable family gathered around the table, his daughter, discovered under the most extraordinary circumstances, his wife, who had found within herself the capacity to love and accept, Joanna, Sophia's dedicated mother, now an indispensable part of their lives. "Yes," he agreed, feeling a deep, serene happiness he had never experienced before. The best day ever. And as they prepared to leave, Richard knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found the true meaning of success, not in bank accounts or grand ventures, but in the love of a little girl who, against all odds, had found him and declared to the world, "My daddy is here."